What's up, boys? So it's been a while, but I was going to record this video out in the treehouse. Turns out the sun went down, and here we are out in my room instead because I didn't want to record in the dark. But today I want to talk to you guys about Classic WoW, some of my opinions about the game, and just in general my experience with the game. Now that we're about a little bit after 3 months after the game's been over, we're in patch or phase 2.5. BGs have just been released and BWL is on the horizon. So I wanted to talk to you guys pretty much about my experiences with the game, what I've been doing in the game, how I've enjoyed it, and then also a lot more meta stuff in terms of kind of the game as a whole, how I think that it's gone, people's expectations around the game, the community surrounding the game, and how all those things have really changed Classic WoW into being a different experience than Vanilla WoW. So, the first thing that I want to get off my chest and talk about at the very beginning is that I am going to be saying some things that are not going to be exclusively positive about the game. And I want everybody to understand that I fucking love the game. Like, I'm wearing my hoodie for the game. I'm logged onto the game right now. I play the game off stream like way too much, like absolutely way too much. Like any time that I'm basically spending offline, I'm playing Classic WoW, like grinding honor or something like that. I really enjoy the game a lot. I have a great time playing it, and I wanted to share kind of what those experiences were for me personally. I think that one of the weirdest things about Classic WoW was to go back and do some of the quests that I did back whenever I was 16 or 17 and see that actually, no, this wasn't some mysterious quest shrouded in secrecy that no one could understand. It was actually just that you didn't read it. The reason I never got my warrior weapon, the whirlwind axe at level 30, was because I threw away the little laundry list that the guy gives you of items that you need to bring to him. I threw all those. I threw that little because it wasn't a quest item. I could throw it away. So I was like, what the fuck do I need this for? I throw it away, and I did, and so I never got the X. That's not really hard. It's just I was a fucking idiot. Like it's actually almost scary for me to go back and do some of these quests and do some of these raids and everything and this content in Classic, and it's like, and I'm not even talking about the difficulty of the raids or anything like that. It's just like the quests. Like all you had to do was read the quest, and you didn't read the quest, and that's why it was so hard for you. Again, this was not some magical adventure shrouded in mystery. This was just you not reading what it told you to read, and I always think that's kind of funny. The way that the difficulty of the game is so much associated with the people's experience with it, not necessarily the game itself. It's a lot of times it's like, for example, you go back and you play like Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and you remember watching Epona jumping over those little fences and then jumping out of the little, I don't know, the stable that she was in, and you're like, man, it just looks like a real horse, man. This is crazy. And you go back and you play it nowadays, and man, it doesn't look like a horse at all. So it's really kind of weird how time can change our perception and give us a different idea on something. And whenever you go back and you see it again, it changes it for you. There's a lot of things like that for me personally. Movies, for example, there are a lot of like '90s comedies that I'll go back and I'll watch and I'll think, man, this was so funny, and no, not really. It wasn't as funny as I thought it was. At least it was still funny, but it wasn't as funny as I thought it was. And anyway, I wanted to say that too. I think that's probably the most interesting thing about the game for me is to see the same challenges that I went through as a young kid and go back and do them now, and it's much different. And I think for a lot of other people, it's been kind of the same thing, but there have been other things that have been kind of patched into the game that have been very altering for them as a player. The girlfriend patch, the kids patch, the job patch, the mortgage patch, the owning a house patch. A lot of these patches have made the game a lot more difficult for these former hardcore players. And for me, I'm lucky enough to be able to play the game for a living, basically. So I don't really have to worry about that as much. But it is kind of weird to see a lot of the guys that are, like former hardcore players and everything still sitting around to like level 30 or 40. And on the flip side, you see a lot of people who played through the game and they completed all the content in a matter of weeks, really, and now they have nothing to do. And I think that really what's so odd about this is that whenever the game was coming out, I think there were a lot of people who they played the game up to be, and this is probably something that I've done too. They romanticized the game to a point to where no game really could live up to the expectations that they gave it. There's no way that the game could be such a life-changing experience for everybody in the same way that it was for me. I said, I think in my last video, that you can't step in the same river twice. And I think what a lot of people are learning, especially for classic WoW nowadays, is that you can't step in the same river once. The classic WoW of 2005 and 2006 is not the classic WoW of 2019. The game is just simply different. The meta is different, players are different, everything is different. The only thing that's actually really kind of pretty much the same is the game. Obviously, there have been a lot of changes. We have the finalized talents that are released, the finalized Alterac Valley that was released. There's a lot of people talking about that. And a number of things. The server populations are much higher. That was more of like a starting phase 2 issue, not really as much of one now. But all of these other issues have kind of turned into being a lot bigger than what people thought they were going to be in the game. I think it's very interesting to see people that are going and playing the game for the first time, and they download a Quest add-on and they play the game the same way that people play BFA nowadays. And I think that it really does kind of go to show that the way that people play games in 2019 is very different than the way they play games in 2004, 2005, 2006. I think that one of the biggest differences is that players nowadays are much more goal oriented than they used to be. Nowadays, with YouTube and with streaming and with just hardcore and competitive culture being the predominant force in terms of creating narratives and communication and conversations around games, the goals that players have are much more elitist, and I don't really know if elitist is the right word, but they're much more high end. And so you have a lot more people nowadays that are grinding towards Grand Marshal. You have a lot more people nowadays who are trying to complete Molten Core and trying to complete all of the raids and just raiding in general. There are very many people nowadays. If you look at the population, I guess, of all of the people who rated or are rating currently in Classic WoW, and people who are level 60, I would say a huge percentage of the people who are level 60 are actually, they're clearing Molten Core on the same week. Or, sorry, not on the same week that they hit 60, but they're clearing Molten Core in general. So I'd say, like, at least, like, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about this, but there's a huge portion of people that are level 60 and the people that are clearing Molten Core. So back in like vanilla WoW, like these are just like random numbers. Maybe like 3% or 5% of people killed Ragnaros at level 60 by the end of vanilla WoW. And in classic WoW, I think the number is already much higher than that in terms of level 60 players. So and that's also with like the same finalized talents that we were dealing with back in vanilla WoW at the very end anyway. So I don't really think the comparison to is really as accurate. I think it's basically the same thing. And the fact is that players nowadays, they have so much better understanding of mechanics. They have better tools like add-ons, for example. They have better knowledge of just the game, and so they can play their characters at a more highly optimized level. And all of these different factors have kind of come into play, and they've altered the way that people play Classic WoW fundamentally. And I think that's been much more evident, especially now that BGs have been released. It's been extremely evident with BGs because back in the day, Alterac Valleys would last for longer than 10 minutes, let's just say. And nowadays, Alterac Valleys last between 6 to 9 minutes usually. And like, there's a part of me that likes both of them, right? I mean, I like the honor farming of it, but at the same time, I also like playing AV in the old school, and summoning the rock guy and summoning Ibis the Forest Lord and defending towers and everything like that. That's usually what I would do back whenever I first started playing the game. But the reason why you see so many 6-minute games is because so many people that are playing classic WoW nowadays are very fixated and focused around in-game progression, and they're focused around being able to get those items and get those things that they weren't able to obtain back in 2006 or 2005. And I think that the goal-oriented nature of the way that people play games nowadays has completely altered the way that classic WoW is consumed, and that's been at the frustration of a lot of people in the community. And I think that the reason for that is that leading up to classic WoW, there's been an idea of the classic experience, and that's like a air quote classic experience. And what I mean by that is someone who levels up kind of on their own. They don't really get run through dungeons. They don't really, they have to farm their gold for their mount at level 40. They don't use a quest helper add-on, and they don't just only run dungeons. They pretty much mostly do quests, maybe a few dungeons once or twice. And people have kind of created and crafted this narrative around this holy grail of a classic WoW experience that may have existed for a lot of people, including myself even, back in 2006, but for many less people now in 2019. Because again, players are very goal oriented. You saw a lot of dungeon farming groups, people that would just do SM over and over and over, from 30 all the way over to 40, doing the same dungeons, ad nauseum. I did it, it was terrible, but it was the fastest way to level. And, hmm, sorry about that. Um, it was the fastest way to level, and because of that, everybody took advantage of it. And I think that really does go to show how different information is consumed nowadays versus back then. Nowadays, you have people who it's their job to teach you how to play classic WoW in the most optimized way possible. In 2006, that really wasn't the case, or it was so small that it wasn't really as influential as it is now. But you have YouTubers, streamers, people that write guides, people on Twitter, Reddit, etc., and all of these people sharing ideas and tips and tricks and everything else in between to show people how to play the game in the most optimized way possible. And what that's ended up doing is that it's created a way for people to basically optimize. I saw a post about this, optimize the fun out of the game. And that is pretty much what they do. I think that it's undeniable, or at least for me personally. While I like actually doing multiple dungeon runs and trying to like optimize the dungeon runs, I think that it's a more enjoyable and a more, I guess, like a more varied experience to be able to go out and do your quests and spend more time questing than you do doing dungeons. Whenever I leveled up my first character, for example, I think I probably did like a 60-40, maybe a 70-30 between like quests as the primary and dungeons as the secondary. But I know for a fact, I mean, for 30 to 40, I remember I spent like 12 hours straight just doing SM. It was awful. But that one day after that, I never did it again. So I think that people see streamers and they see the way that more hardcore players play the game, and there's so much more emulation of that than there was back then. And I don't really think that's something you can get rid of. I don't necessarily think that it's something bad, or it's not really something good. It's just kind of a change, because games have kind of evolved, and the way that people play the games have evolved. And I don't really think that you can ever go back and give people that pristine experience, because that experience was a product of its time. It's kind of like, listening to punk rock in the 70s is probably a lot different than listening to punk rock in 2019. And just all the other examples are the kind of the same thing. It's like gaming in the 90s was different than gaming nowadays. It's much different. I mean, you don't have, as many TV shows talking about how games are terrible and whatever. Gaming's much more mainstream, and just the entire culture around it is just, it's a completely different world that we're living in now. So to expect the experience that somebody gets nowadays to be what somebody else got 10 years ago or 15 years ago, to have it be an exact facsimile is just, in my opinion, unrealistic. And I think that a lot of people did the game a disservice by trying to oversell that and giving people, this hope of having this holy grail of an experience that was so life changing for them, and this is me included, that they created an expectation that could only be disappointing. And it's very disappointing to see that so many people are unhappy and upset about that. But I think that what can rise from the ashes out of that is something that's even better, which is a new game, a new community, a new culture, and a new environment. Because while Classic WoW isn't vanilla WoW, it can still be Classic WoW, and that's not a bad thing. I've enjoyed the game a lot for all the time that I've played it. It's been extremely fun, and I'd like to see more people be able to experience that as much as they can. But I think that one problem that the game has had is that there's been so much focus around the way that other people play the game that it's actually turned out to be something negative. I've seen a lot of people who are very fixated on, people that are, like they don't understand their class very well. So they're kicked out the second they aren't optimizing their rotation in molten core. Like it really matters if one person is, not that we have a moonkin in the raid. Like, oh, who cares? Like, you can do the raid with 20 people. It doesn't really matter. But just like all of these little things that they matter. And then also on the flip side, you have the people that want to intentionally play the game in a way that's not very effective. And, they do that and then they expect to be treated the same as somebody who's min maxing in like a raiding environment. And obviously, that's not necessarily fair either. And I think that what's really kind of happened is you've had so many different types of players come into Classic WoW that you're seeing them clash. And I think also not only are people very vitriolic and, not necessarily emotional, but they're very opinionated on the way that not only they play the game, but the way that other people play the game. But you have the added layer of the nostalgia of the game that people want to see others re experience in the same way that they did. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does become a bad thing whenever it turns into being some sort of like suffocating force that prevents players from being able to enjoy the game in the way that they do, which is a new way, a different way than the way that we used to back in actual vanilla WoW. And you could say that's a sad thing or not, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. It's the way the game is nowadays. And I think that the more people that come to realize that and that come to just kind of understand the way that other people play the game and don't pass judgment or have opinions or get very angry or upset about certain people that are trying to honor farm, certain people that don't care about honor farming. Clearing molten core too fast, you're an asshole. Clearing molten core too slow, you suck. If you're playing Ret Paladin, you're shitty. If you're mad at people for playing Ret Paladins, you're an elitist. And if you're dungeon grinding all day, you aren't getting the real experience. If you're not dungeon grinding all day, you're on level 40 and you suck. It's like, it doesn't matter what you do, somebody in the community is going to have an opinion about the way that you're playing this game. And I don't think that's done the game any favors. I really don't. I think that it's been a divisive force, and it's been, I think, a repellent on a lot of new players because they go into the game and then they're expected to play the game in all of these different pre-constructed ways that are often informed by a nostalgia for something that can't really exist again. And as I said, I think that, at the very beginning of Classic and before the game came out, I was probably a little bit guilty of this. And as the game has been released, I've seen, how wrong I was on a number of things. I think that probably the biggest wrong that I've had is Phase 2 being the golden age of Classic WoW. People can quote me on that all day long, and how fucking wrong I was with that. Oh my god, it was a disaster. I mean, and really, I think that Phase 2 is probably a very good example that you can use of the way that the game has evolved in, with the play styles of players today. There are so many players today that are honor farming that you have a situation like the server Flamelash. If you watch my stream in the past few days, you probably know about this, or if you've seen the classic Reddit, you'd know about this. There's literally a server in the EU servers that the Horde won the war. They effectively turned it into a PvE server because all of the alliance quit the game or they transferred off the server. So it's something like 99 to 1 or 90 like 50 to 1 on the server, and you have more Horde and Ironforge than Alliance. You have more Horde and Ironforge than Thunderbluff even, because they're farming honor. I've seen some posts about it and people saying that these guys are sociopaths or terrible people for trying to farm the players that are sitting in Ironforge. But the truth is that it's a game and they're just playing the game to win. I don't really think that they're necessarily sociopaths. Maybe they're destructive with the game in terms of the social systems. But I think that whenever the game's own progression systems conflict with the social systems, you shouldn't necessarily fault people for trying to progress in the game. So it's created a situation where there's obviously a clear thing that is bad for the game and like the social health of the game, but the game itself promotes that exact thing. So like how do you reconcile those two issues? I think that as more raid tiers come out, that'll be less of a problem because the other gear that's equivalent to the Grand Marshal gear or the Grand Marshal weapons or Field Marshal gear will be available. But nowadays, people are grinding the hell out of Honor because they want to get that gear and get that stuff early so they can just dumpster people. And I can totally understand that. I'm planning to do that myself too. But you can see a server like that happening, and is that good for the game? Absolutely not. I think that many people that are on the Alliance have probably quit the game. Many people probably that are on the Horde have quit the game off that server too, because they wanted to play on a PvP server, and now they're not. So it just kind of sucks for them, and I can understand that. It's really kind of disappointing, but while it's a very, very interesting case study on the way that humans act in a completely open sandbox environment where two factions are pitted against each other and one faction actually just wins, it's historic. It really is. It's historic. It's an incredible event to happen. It's awesome. It's awesome from a theoretical perspective, but if you play on that server, it is the last thing from awesome. It is certainly not. It's terrible. It's terrible. Those guys are not having a good time at all. And I think Blizzard is obviously in kind of a between a rock and a hard place between making changes that could make the game adapt to 2019's play styles versus making the game exactly the same as it was, the no changes thing. And what the right decision for Blizzard is, I think it's very, very situational. I know that whenever AV came out, again, people were very upset because AV right now is just the far and away best way to farm honor. It's better than World PvP by multiples. It's better than Warsong Gulch probably by double, maybe a little bit less than that, depending on how fast your games are and if you're pre-mating. But overall, you just see people queuing AVs all day long, and they're just running in there, not even interacting with any other players. And then the worst part about it is that there was a report system where you could just instantly get people kicked out of the game for trying to actually engage in PvP because everybody else in the group just wanted to farm honor. What do you say? What do you say? What a wild adventure it's been, and I think it's really interesting to see how these things play themselves out. I think it really is, but there's a lot of things that are interesting that aren't good, and I don't know what Blizzard can do about that kind of stuff. Obviously, I think they fixed the AFK reporting thing, but the culture that's built around it is still not necessarily the best thing for the game. So I think that really going forward, if I could ask the community to do anything, it would be to be more accepting and be less judgmental about the way that other people play the game. At the end of the day, it's just a game. Someone ninja looting gear, someone farming Ironforge on the opposite faction, or someone AFK reporting another person out of a BG. I never really believed in video games being I guess like a microcosm into the mind of a person. I think that there are a lot of people who, maybe they work at a cat charity at home, and in real life, and then they come home and they play classic WoW and they go and they gank lobbies. Right, this is fun for them. doesn't make them a terrible person at all. It's just what they want to spend their time doing. And I think that's one of the most interesting and special things about MMOs, is that it gives people that level of escapism that nothing else can really do it for. And I don't really believe that the way that people act in video games is necessarily reflective of who they are as a person. For some people it is, but it's not necessarily a guarantee. And lots of memes about it, lots of jokes about it, right? Like different stereotypes about different players of different classes, right? But overall, I mean, all those are just jokes and memes. Sometimes they're true, sometimes they're very often true, but they're not always true. And I think it's very important to keep that in mind. And I think the community would do itself a lot of favors by being less judgmental on the way that other people play the game, because I think it's starting to cannibalize itself. And I think the more that the game is released and the more content of the game is released, and the more that you have those people try to kind of, I think they'll upset themselves so much that they'll just stop complaining about it. And I think that we're already seeing that happen. But every single time a new patch comes out, I feel like we'll probably still have those same types of people that want to impose their playstyle and, everything else like that, that kind of reinforces their own nostalgia that they've had for the game for years. And I think that oftentimes that's come at the expense of the enjoyment of the genuine new players. So I do hope that Blizzard and the community can kind of reconcile those two things together and give the people that are playing the game nowadays for the first time as close to of the experience that they really had back in 2006 as players did. And that doesn't necessarily mean forcing them into your experience that you had in 2006. And I think that's probably the main thing that I want to kind of end the video on and say, is that try to give people, try not to be as vitriolic or judgmental about the way that people play the game. It's just a game. And I love it. I've been playing it every single day for over 8 hours, every single day. And I don't regret a single second. And I'm about to end this video and keep farming honor. So guys, I'd be curious to hear your opinions about this, but that's pretty much where I'm coming from. So thanks a lot for watching. I really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.